From a retired teacher detained for 2 hours at Heathrow because she said, "I'm not really sure," when asked how long she was staying, to a grandmother separated from her grandchildren in Sydney because her last name didn't match theirs. Travelers are getting pulled into back rooms every single day for answers that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. These are the 18 questions you'll face at customs and immigration, and exactly how to answer each one so you're sipping coffee in the arrivals hall while everyone else is still explaining themselves to officers. Here's why this matters more than it used to. Immigration officers aren't just checking documents anymore, they're reading you, your hesitation, your word choice, your body language. They're trained to spot inconsistencies, and a tired traveler who fumbles an easy question looks exactly like someone with something to hide. The questions themselves aren't hard, but the way you answer them, that determines whether you're through in 90 seconds or stuck in secondary inspection missing your connection. We'll go through these in roughly the order you'll encounter them. And question 12 is the one that trips up experienced travelers more than any other. Let's get into it. Question 1. The passport handover. Before anyone asks you anything, they're already watching you. The moment you approach that desk, an officer is reading your body language, fumbling through your bag, patting your pockets with that panicked look. That tells them something before you said a single word. Your passport should already be in your hand, open to the photo page, ready to present. Get yourself a simple travel wallet, something about the size of a paperback book. Keep your passport, your ID, your boarding pass, and your hotel confirmation in that one spot. Outer pocket, easy zipper access. One motion and everything's out. When the officer says, "Passport, please," you hand it over and say, "Here you go." That's it. No jokes about the ugly photo, no small talk about your flight, no apologies for anything. The goal is to look like someone who travels, even if you don't. Calm and completely unsurprised to be asked for your passport at passport control. Sounds obvious, right? You'd be amazed how many people treat this like a conversation starter. But getting your passport out is the easy part. What you say next actually matters. Question 2. Where are you flying from? They already know the answer. Your boarding pass told them. Your passport stamps told them. The airline sent your information before you even landed. So why do they ask? They want to see if your story matches their records. And honestly, they want to hear how you tell it. If you flew direct, this is easy. From Atlanta or from Los Angeles, done. If you had connections, mention your starting point and one obvious layover. From Chicago, with a connection in Amsterdam. Clean and simple. What you don't want to do is launch into your entire travel diary. Well, we started in Phoenix, then we had a 4-hour layover in Dallas, which was a nightmare by the way. And the lounge was closed, so we had to sit at the gate. Then we flew to London, but our bags went to Manchester. They didn't ask for the director's cut. Give them the headline. I've watched people turn a 5-second answer into a 3-minute monologue. The officer's eyes glaze over around the 30-second mark, and now you're memorable for all the wrong reasons. This next question is where things start to get interesting, because it's the first one where your answer actually matters more than the facts. Question 3. What's the purpose of your visit? This is where people overcomplicate things, and I genuinely don't understand why. The officer wants to hear one of about 4 words. Tourism, business, visiting family, or education. That's the menu. Pick from the menu. I'm on vacation, visiting my daughter. Attending a conference. These answers match a mental checklist the officer runs automatically. Tourism means you're spending money and leaving. Business means you have a reason to be here and a reason to go home. Family visit means you have a place to stay and people expecting you. What gets you in trouble is mixing categories or over-explaining. I'm here for vacation, but I might do some work remotely, and I'm also thinking of looking at property because we've always dreamed of retiring here. Congratulations, that sentence just opened 3 separate investigations. You're now explaining your remote work visa status, your financial intentions, and your immigration plans. All because you were being chatty. If you're doing multiple things, lead with the one that matches your visa. On a tourist visa, you're a tourist. Everything else is background noise you keep to yourself. But here's the thing most travelers don't realize. Your purpose has to match your duration. And that's where the next question becomes a trap. Question 4. How long will you be staying? Remember the school teacher from the beginning. This is the question that nearly cost her everything. And it wasn't because she had the wrong answer. It was because she sounded uncertain. I'm not really sure is the phrase that launches 1,000 follow-up questions. Immigration officers hear uncertainty and their brain immediately flags it. Does this person actually have a plan? Do they have a return ticket? Are they going to overstay and become my problem? Your answer needs to be specific and confident. Skip the a few weeks, maybe, and definitely skip it depends. 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, flying home on the 24th. Even if your plans are genuinely flexible, even if you're retired and could technically stay for months, pick a number that fits within your allowed visa time and state it like it's carved in stone. The officer isn't checking your calendar, they're checking your confidence. A person with a plan sounds completely different from a person who's winging it. You can have identical trips planned, but the one who hesitates gets the follow-up questions. Now, Your length of stay has to make sense with what you do for a living. Which brings us to a question that actually works in your favor if you answer it right. Question 5. What do you do for work? They're checking 2 things here. First, do you have a stable life back home that you'd want to return to? Second, can you actually afford this trip without working illegally? Your answer should be short and clear. I'm a nurse. I'm an accountant. I own a small business. If you're retired, just say I'm retired. That's actually one of the best answers you can possibly give, and most retirees don't realize this. Retired travelers have pensions, savings, property, grandchildren, and absolutely no reason to overstay a tourist visa to pick up illegal work. Officers visibly relax when they hear it. You're the opposite of a risk. If you're between jobs, don't panic and definitely don't lie. Just frame it cleanly. I recently finished a contract, and I'm taking some time off before starting my next position. Sounds deliberate. Sounds stable. Sounds like someone who planned this trip, not someone who's fleeing something. What you want to avoid is hesitation. The job question isn't a trick. But if you stammer through it like you're inventing your own biography on the spot, that's exactly what they'll assume you're doing. Speaking of avoiding your trip, sometimes they'll ask about that directly. And when they do, you want to be ready. Question 6. Do you have sufficient funds? This isn't always asked out loud, but it's always being assessed. Sometimes officers ask outright. Sometimes it's implied through questions about your job or accommodation. Either way, be ready. The concern is simple. Can you pay for your trip, or are you going to become someone else's problem? You don't need to flash cash or quote your net worth, but having proof accessible is smart. A credit card with available balance. A recent bank statement you can pull up on your phone or a printed copy in your travel wallet. Confirmation of prepaid hotels. If an officer asks about funds, the witty response sounds like this. Yes, I have my credit card and my accommodations are prepaid. Would you like to see the confirmation, confident, prepared, and offering proof before they have to demand it? Some countries have specific financial requirements for entry. The UK technically expects tourists to demonstrate they can support themselves. Schengen countries may ask for proof of funds at the border. 15 minutes of research before you fly could save you hours at the airport. Is this annoying? Absolutely. But so is getting detained because you couldn't prove you weren't planning to sleep on a park bench. Your accommodation answer ties directly into this, and it's one of the questions where inconsistencies get noticed fast. Question 7. Where will you be staying? This question anchors your entire story. Everything else you said needs to make sense with this answer. If you said you're on vacation, but you're staying with your cousin, that's really visiting family. If you said you're visiting family, but you're staying in a hotel, expect a follow-up question about why. None of this is disqualifying, but inconsistencies get noticed. And noticed is exactly what you don't want to be. Your answer should be short and specific. The Marriott in downtown Edinburgh, an Airbnb in the Latin Quarter. With my brother in Melbourne for the week. What creates problems is vagueness. Somewhere in the city, I haven't really decided yet, sounds like someone who doesn't have a plan. And people without plans make immigration officers nervous. Their job is literally to filter out people who might cause problems, and I'll figure it out is not reassuring. If you're doing multiple stops, lead with the first one. Starting at a hotel in Rome, then taking the train to Florence and Venice. That sounds like a traveler with an itinerary, which is exactly what you want to sound like. Practical tip. Screenshot your hotel confirmation, your Airbnb booking, your cruise details, whatever applies. Save them in a folder on your phone that you can access without Wi-Fi. Airport internet is unreliable at best, and fumbling with a loading screen while an officer waits is not the impression you're going for. But having accommodation is only half the equation. They also want to know you're actually leaving. Question 8. Can I see your return ticket? This is the proof that you actually plan to leave. And, for some countries, it's non-negotiable. A round-trip ticket is the simplest answer. Yes, here it is. Flying home on April 15th. Hand it over, done. But if your travel is more complex, you need to think this through before you arrive. The cruise that returns to the same port counts. An onward flight to your next destination counts. A train ticket to a neighboring country can count in Europe. What doesn't always work is I'm planning to book something while I'm there. Some countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, South America, and parts of Europe, will turn you around at the border if you can't show proof of departure. Not hassle you, not question you, turn you around and put you on the next flight back. If you genuinely have flexible travel plans, there are services that let you book a fully refundable ticket or even a temporary reservation that's real enough for immigration to verify. Search Onward Ticket and you'll find several options. $20 to avoid getting denied entry seems like a reasonable trade. Keep your return ticket accessible in the same place as your passport. If they ask, you want to produce it in seconds, not minutes. So far, we've covered the basics that every traveler faces. But this next question catches people off guard because there's no right answer, only suspicious ones. Question 9. Are you traveling alone? Officers often already know the answer from your booking information. They're checking consistency and watching your reaction. If you're alone, say so directly. Yes, traveling solo. There's nothing suspicious about traveling alone, and millions of people do it every year. But hesitating or over-explaining can create suspicion where none existed. If you're with others, keep it simple. With my wife, she's right behind me in line. With my sister and her husband, you don't need to introduce the whole cast of characters or explain how you know each other. What you absolutely want to avoid is unnecessary autobiography. Well, I was supposed to travel with my friend, but she canceled last minute because of her hip surgery, and then I thought about postponing, but the tickets were non-refundable. And honestly, I almost didn't come, but my daughter said I should just go anyway, because when am I going to get another chance? That's not answering the question. That's processing your feelings out loud to a government employee who has 300 people waiting behind you. Save it for the flight home. Whether you're alone or with someone, the next question probes a bit deeper into your connections. Question 10. Do you have any family here? This question makes some travelers nervous, and officers know it, which means they're watching your reaction as much as listening to your answer. Having family in the country you're visiting is completely normal and completely legal. But the officer is assessing whether that family connection might tempt you to overstay. A cousin you're visiting for a week reads differently than a spouse you're visiting with no return date. If you have no family there, a simple "no, I don't" is perfect. Don't elaborate. Don't apologize. Don't explain that you wish you did. If you do have family, give the essential facts. My sister lives in Toronto. I'm staying with her for 10 days. Notice how that answer includes the relationship, the location, and crucially, the duration. It sounds like a visit with an ending, not a soft relocation. What triggers extra scrutiny is vagueness combined with family ties. Yeah, I've got some relatives scattered around. Sounds like you might be testing the waters for a longer stay, even if you're not. Be ready to provide an address or phone number fast. Having that information at your fingertips shows your visit is real and expected, not something you're improvising. Now, everything so far has been about your current trip. But they might also ask about your history, and this is where honesty becomes non-optional. By the way, if you find this video helpful or like this style of content, please consider subscribing for more travel tips. Question 11. Have you been here before? The officer is looking at your passport while asking this. They can see your previous stamps. This isn't a memory test. What they're really checking is your honesty and your composure. A person who lies about something the officer can verify in 3 seconds is a person who might lie about other things too. And now they're curious what else you might be hiding. If it's your first visit, say so. No, this is my first time. You can add, I've been looking forward to it if you want, but don't feel obligated to be chatty. If you visited before, give a rough time frame. Yes, once about 5 years ago on vacation. A few times for work back in the 90s. You don't need exact dates, and you definitely don't need a detailed history of every trip with nostalgic commentary about how much the city has changed. The worst answer is a long pause followed by, let me think. You just made them wonder why something this simple requires so much thought. Up next is the question I mentioned earlier, the one that trips up experienced travelers more than almost any other. Question 12. Who packed your bags? This sounds like a ridiculous question, and honestly, it kind of is. It feels like security theater from 1987, but it still gets asked, particularly in the UK and for flights to certain destinations. And underestimating it is a mistake. The concern is whether you know what's in your luggage. If someone else packed it, or if someone gave you something to carry, you might unknowingly be transporting something you shouldn't. If you packed your own bag, which you absolutely should have, the answer is simply, I did. If your spouse helped you pack, which is common and fine, just acknowledge it straightforwardly. My wife helped me, we packed together. The key is demonstrating you're aware of what you're carrying. Now here's where I'm going to be blunt, because this is genuinely important. Never, under any circumstances, agree to carry something through customs for someone else. Not a package for a friend of a friend. Not a small favor for someone you met at the airport who seems lovely. Not anything from anyone you haven't known for years. This is how people end up in foreign prisons. I'm not being dramatic. Google it if you want to ruin your afternoon. This question is really a prelude to the customs portion of your journey, which has its own set of questions. Question 13. What's in your bags? This usually comes at customs rather than immigration, but the principles are the same. If you're carrying nothing unusual, just clothes and personal items, covers it. Standard tourist luggage doesn't need a detailed inventory, and providing one unprompted makes you look nervous. But if you're carrying anything that might raise questions, know the rules in advance and be ready to discuss them honestly. Prescription medications should be in their original pharmacy bottles with your name on them. If you take controlled substances like certain pain medications, anxiety medications, or sleep aids, some countries require a doctor's letter explaining your need for them. Research this before you travel. Not while you're standing at the customs desk watching an officer examine your pill bottles. High-value items like expensive cameras, jewelry, or electronics might need to be declared, especially if you're carrying enough that it looks like you could be importing goods for resale. The key is that being upfront is always faster than being caught. Officers are far more forgiving of "I have prescription medication for my blood pressure" declared at the start than "Oh, those pills. I forgot about those" discovered during a search. This brings us to the formal declaration question, which most people sleepwalk through and some people regret. Question 14. Do you have anything to declare? This is the big customs question. An answer you're wrong can turn a 5-minute process into an expensive mistake. Customs rules vary by country, but categories that typically require declaration include food and agricultural products, large amounts of currency, expensive items you're bringing in, alcohol and tobacco beyond duty-free allowances, and certain medications. If you have nothing to declare, say so clearly. "No, I don't." Look them in the eye. Don't hesitate like you're running through a mental inventory of everything in your suitcase. If you're unsure about something, mention it. "I have some sealed snacks and my prescription medications." Do those need declaring? This shows you're being thoughtful and cooperative. Officers notice and they appreciate it. Here's the reality about accidentally breaking these rules. Bringing an apple through customs because you forgot it was in your bag isn't going to land you in prison. The officer will probably just confiscate it and move on. But lying about it when asked directly, that can get you fined. And multiple lies over multiple trips can get you flagged for enhanced screening forever. Some countries keep records, and randomly selected for additional inspection becomes a lot less random. When in doubt, declare it. The worst outcome is a quick "no, that's fine, go ahead." The worst outcome of hiding something is considerably worse. One specific thing that always needs declaring is large amounts of cash. Question 15. Are you carrying more than $10,000? Most countries require you to declare large amounts of cash or monetary instruments. In the US and much of Europe, the threshold is $10,000 or the local equivalent. If you're not carrying anywhere near that amount, the answer is simply no. Done. Move on. If you are traveling with significant cash, and there are legitimate reasons you might be, you need to declare it. This doesn't mean you can't bring it. You're absolutely allowed to travel with cash. You just have to tell them about it. Failure to declare large currency amounts is taken very seriously. We're talking confiscation of the entire amount and fines at minimum. Potential criminal charges at maximum. This is one of those rules where "I didn't know" gets you absolutely nowhere. If you're carrying multiple currencies, add them up at current exchange rates. If you're traveling with a partner and carrying cash between you, the combined total is what matters. Is this invasive? Sure. Does complaining about it help you at the border? Not even slightly. A few more questions come up in specific situations, and they're worth covering because they catch people off guard. Question 16. Do you have travel insurance? Not every country asks this, but some require it, and the ones that require it will actually check. The Schengen area, which covers most of Western Europe, technically requires travel insurance with at least 30,000 euros of medical coverage for visa holders. They don't check at every border crossing, but they can, and some people find out the hard way that technically required means actually required. Cuba requires proof of health insurance that's valid in Cuba specifically. They check at the airport, and if you don't have it, you buy it on the spot at whatever price they're charging that day. Even where insurance isn't mandatory, being able to show proof of it signals you're a prepared, responsible traveler. It's a small thing that can make a positive impression. Beyond immigration, travel insurance is just smart planning. A medical emergency abroad without insurance can wipe out a retirement account faster than a stock market crash. A canceled flight where lost luggage without coverage becomes a problem you solve entirely on your own, often in a language you don't speak. There's one more specific situation that deserves attention, especially for grandparents. Question 17. Traveling with children? If you're traveling with children or grandchildren, especially if you have a different last name or if one parent isn't present, be prepared for additional questions. This isn't harassment. It's child protection. Officers are trained to watch for signs of trafficking or custody violations, and they take it seriously, which means you need to take preparation seriously. Carry documentation, a birth certificate, or a copy of it. If you're traveling without the other parent, bring a signed consent letter from them authorizing the travel. Some countries have specific requirements for what this letter must include, and "I didn't know I needed that" doesn't make the requirement disappear. Prepare children for basic questions too. Who are you traveling with? Where are you going? Officers may ask kids directly, and a child who seems confused, overly coached, or scared can trigger additional concern. That grandmother I mentioned at the beginning, she was traveling with her grandchildren through Sydney. Different last name, no consent letter. It took 2 hours to sort out, including phone calls to the parents in the middle of the American night. Her granddaughter cried, she cried. Customs eventually let them through, but she describes it as one of the worst experiences of her life. She now travels with notarized consent letters, multiple copies every single time. One last question you might encounter, and it's basically a final sweep. This should 18. Anything else you'd like to tell me? Sometimes I ask as a wrap up, this gives you one last chance to mention anything relevant. If you've been honest throughout, this is easy. No, I think we've covered everything. But if something's been nagging you, something you weren't sure about, something that might look bad if they find it later, this is your chance. Better to say, actually, I do have some medication I wasn't sure about now than to have it discovered during a random bag check. Some travelers use this moment to ask quick questions about where to find the connecting gate or which line to use next. That's fine, but keep it brief. There's a line of exhausted travelers behind you, and the officer's been doing this for hours, putting it all together. The thing that experienced travelers understand and nervous travelers don't is that immigration officers aren't trying to trap you. They don't get a bonus for pulling people in the secondary inspection. They don't enjoy making you miss connections. They process hundreds of people every shift. And what they want more than anything is for each interaction to be quick, clear, and consistent. Your job is to make their job easy. That means documents ready before you reach the desk. Direct answers to direct questions. No volunteering information nobody asked for. Polite but not chatty. Confident but not arrogant. The travelers who get pulled aside usually aren't doing anything wrong. They're giving confusing answers, acting nervous about simple questions, creating extra work for officers who would genuinely rather stamp the passport and move on. Here's a test. Can you communicate? I'm a legitimate tourist with plans, money, and a ticket home in under 60 seconds. If yes, you're fine. If you need 5 minutes and a PowerPoint presentation, you need to simplify your story. Preparation beats nervousness every time. Organize your documents before you land. Think through your answers before you reach the desk. Practice saying them out loud once, which feels ridiculous, but actually works. Walk up to that counter with the quiet confidence of someone who belongs there. Because you do. You're a traveler with every right to be there. You just happen to know exactly what to say. If this helped you feel more prepared, subscribe. I've got a video on screen right now about the biggest mistakes travelers make at airport security. Worth watching before your next trip. Safe travels.